What's up, Earth Rockers? It's your boy Shovatar here, who's going to try to complete a voice commentary, even though the last one that he tried to finish, even though it was only about 19 minutes long, he ended up almost coughing his lungs out. Regardless, it's time for another shot at it. And only for a game as good as Dracula's Curse would I choose to strain myself like this. This was inevitable. I talked about revisiting games in the series. Any of the games in the series that were interesting to me, any of the ones that I really wanted to talk about with better mic quality or just talk more about in general. This one was obviously going to make the list. Dracula's Curse remains to this day one of the best games I've ever played, and collecting this footage and then going back and watching some of the footage in preparation for this commentary just reminded me of everything about the game that I love. And it's going to be tough to talk about that exactly until we get a little bit further into the game. For now, I just want to explain the footage a little bit. So this is a no damage run, but as that first whip swing was supposed to hit that skeleton, by the way. That was something that I was consistently screwing up, even after I did so many attempts. That right there was risky, but it looks cool, and this is only about 90 seconds into the run. So that's the kind of thing that I'm willing to go for if it's early in the run. This is no damage, but as I make very clear in the title of the uncommentated video, it's also segmented. That's just because Dracula's Curse is a very long game by classic Castlevania standards. The video file that I'm looking at is about 53 minutes, and I think the game itself is going to be over about 48 minutes in, so that's over twice as long as Castlevania 1 was, almost 3 times as long actually, if you're only counting, like, gameplay time. So, doing a full, non-segmented, no damage run didn't really seem feasible with the time frame that I wanted to work with. So I did, but I also really wanted to talk about the game again, so I kind of had to compromise and go for this like halfway thing. Just put some cool footage together for you guys to watch while I talk about the game again. And segmenting it also allowed me to go for certain things late in the run that I probably wouldn't have gone for, or that I definitely wouldn't have gone for, had this been a single segment continuous run. But that's not really going to come into play until the very end of the game, which I'll talk about. It's segmented. The 3 segments are levels 1 and 2 are their own segment, levels 3 through 6 are their own segment, and then level 7 to the end of the game is going to be its own segment. And if you wonder what I mean by segments, what I mean is I made a save state at those points that I talked about, and if I died after that point, I would go back to that save state. That's what a segment is in this context. Or what a segment is generally. The reason that I decided to put the first segment after level 2 is because level 2 is actually a really hard level to no damage. Not the hardest. I don't exactly remember where I had the most resets or where I had the most trouble, but I know for a fact that level 2 was a problem area because of just the nature of a lot of the later rooms, which you'll see when we get to them. But the clock tower is very important because this is where I'm going to get my companion for this footage, Grant, who is my favorite of the 3 companions you can get in Dracula's Curse, for reasons that, again, I can't really talk about right now. Better to wait until the reasons are demonstrated in the gameplay. And it's a very interesting decision, generally, to put the clock tower, to have it here as this, sometimes when I make that second jump off the edge of the platform, I can barely clip up onto the pendulum, but that time it didn't happen, if you're wondering what that first little jump was. It's an interesting decision to have the clock tower be this, like, optional level at the very start of the game that gives you a companion, because the other 2 companions, Sypha and Alucard, are sort of like, the centerpiece of their own routes. Like in Dracula's Curse, there are 2 routes you can take before you get to the last 3 levels of the game, which are always the same, which is the Sypha Route and the Alucard Route. Grant you can bring to either the Sypha Route or the Alucard Route, but really, you shouldn't really do the Alucard Route without Alucard, in my opinion. The levels in the Alucard Route are very much designed around you having Alucard, but I'm going to talk more about that when I get to the Alucard video. So this video is going to be, I'm going to take Grant, but I'm going to go down the Sypha Route, which I think is the better of the 2 routes anyway. And as you can perhaps begin to see now why this level was tricky to deal with, because honestly the clock tower, this is what's so interesting about putting it at the beginning of the game as an optional level. The clock tower is honestly a lot trickier than many of the levels that come after it. Because you have all these Medusa heads, you have all these death pits, these tricky jumps that you have to do, gears pushing you around. It really doesn't get this difficult again until, like, I don't know, certain parts of Sypha 6, and then maybe the Alucard alternate 6. Later in the game is the point that I'm making. And the idea is that you're supposed to be rewarded for doing this difficult optional level with a companion who's really powerful. Because if you just go to the Sypha route and you only do the levels that are not optional, you'll just get Sypha. I honestly think that Sypha, in the US version of the game at least, is better than Grant by a pretty significant margin, but really, Sypha's power level, in my opinion, is very dependent on the sub-weapons you can get for her and how long she can hold on to them. Like, if you do a deathless run and you can have Sypha constantly run around with lightning, then she's definitely better than Grant. And what makes Grant cool is that the way Grant helps you in Dracula's Curse, in the US version at least, and I'll talk about the regional differences in a little bit, really has nothing to do with his... Well, it doesn't have nothing to do with his sub-weapons. The fact that Grant gives you access to a second sub-weapon slot is actually really, really important, as I'm going to demonstrate later in the footage. But what Grant does, and what makes Grant... What he does for you, really, is he can climb up walls, he can climb across ceilings. He gives you more options for traversing the level. You can skip a lot of things with Grant. You can get certain angles on bosses that you'd never be able to get otherwise, which I'm going to demonstrate in level 4 and then again in level 5. So he's my favorite companion because the level, like how much he helps you and how effective he is really kind of dependent on your personal level of creativity. Like, can you view these levels through this lens of, like, the walls are now climbable, the ceiling is now climbable, and how well can you take advantage of that? So he's a companion who encourages you to think in ways that I think Sypha kind of doesn't, and Alucard doesn't either. Because with them, the only important decisions... That Medusa head went right through my head, but I guess I didn't take damage. Oh well. The only decisions you really have to make about Sypha are, like, what sub-weapons you want her to have, and with Sypha, you pretty much always want lightning. Then, with Alucard, the only decisions you really have to make are, do I have Alucard turn into a bat and fly around? And usually that's a very simple, like, yes or no question, and doesn't require very much thought. With Grant, you have it opens up this way of thinking about the levels that's completely different. I also think he's not overpowered the way Sypha is in the US version, and he's not in the weird position that Alucard is in the game, where Alucard is, like, completely useless 80% of the time, or like 90% of the time, but then there are a couple of spots in his levels, in the Alucard route levels, where he's, like, basically mandatory, which is not a great feeling, because it doesn't really feel like you're making a decision. or you're not like making a strategic choice. The game is just saying, okay, you need to use bat form here. And the encouragement that the game gives you to use Grant starts off right here in the second half of the clock tower. I think that's why they make you descend the clock tower again to get out of the level, is to sort of encourage you to see what Grant can do and take advantage of his movement capabilities. To finally talk about the region differences, Grant is very different in the JP version of Dracula's Curse, which I'm just going to refer to as Densetsu in probably all of the commentary tracks that I do for this game. Here's the first break, by the way, that's what the pause is. That's the first, like, cut. So Grant in JP, I actually forgot to talk about the sub-weapon choices. I picked up the Holy Water, and I wanted to get triple shot Holy Water on Trevor for the first 2 bosses of the game. Holy Water just demolishes the Skull Knight at level 1, and as you saw, it crushes Grant in the clock tower as well. I'm going to pick up the Cross here instead for this boss, the boss of this level, and then also, I think, the boss of the next level, which we'll get to. Grant is not really like a... He's gonna be out for some of the bosses, actually more, now that I'm remembering it. I think I use him to kill several bosses in the game, but that's not gonna be for a little while, and that's not really his main function. He's more about the levels themselves and helping you traverse them quickly and avoid certain combat situations. But to get back to the... I think my phone just went off. Sorry, I think my phone just went off. To get back to the region differences, in Densetsu, Grant has throwing daggers as like a default weapon. So that means that he has this like infinite horizontal range, essentially, which can be really useful in certain situations. The limitation is that he can only have one throwing dagger on the screen at a time, which means that his attacking speed is pretty slow. But like I said, the mitigating factor is that he can hit enemies from any horizontal range that he wants. Grant can use the axe, the dagger, or the stopwatch subweapon in Dracula's Curse. In Densetsu, he can only use the axe and the stopwatch because he has the daggers by default. Grant's default attack in Dracula's Curse is like a very short-range dagger stab, which you're not going to see very much because it's very risky. One of like the design cornerstones of Castlevania that makes it good is the Belmont Whip, and it's the fact that like it makes it easy to safely engage enemies. Because you have all this range on them. But the Grant's knife does not have that, so it's inherently kind of risky to use. This was a spot that I ended up losing a lot of runs to. A lot of like the later areas of level 3, the part with the balloon pods that explode, I lost a lot of runs there, just because like they can just sneak up on you sometimes. Yeah, this is what I wanted the cross for. If you don't have like a triple shot or double shot cross for the Cyclops, then you just have to kind of wait for him to walk back and forth a lot of times, and it's not very fun. Look at that beautiful action shot. Oh, I'm still walking on the air. I'm like hovering off the ground. That's funny. Nope. The hymn there is pretty funny because I thought it was a translation error, but apparently in the instruction manual it says that Sypha is disguising herself as a man, which seems somewhat dubious to me given some of the details of her sprite, but who am I to argue with the instruction book? So level 4 is, in my opinion, the place where Grant really shines. Having an axe available is pretty good, but really the thing that makes Grant special here is how much of the level he can skip. And I think I'm gonna pick up the stop... No, okay, interesting. I think on hard mode I would pick up a stopwatch there, because on hard mode there's more enemies in this room that I would want a stopwatch to deal with, but here I just need the axe, and that'll take care of most of it. You can use Grant to crawl along the ceiling here, but the problem is that ghost right there that spawns, because you'll eventually run into him. It's a pretty cool idea, but it doesn't really work out in practice, unfortunately. So this is the first big, major help that Grant gives. The major way that Grant helps you is by not having to worry about the problem of, like, going up those stairs while there's a blood skeleton walking at you. And that's even worse on hard mode because there's also bats spawning. So this was a weird quirk of Grant's movement. The reason I fell off there is because sometimes it's hard to get Grant to, like, climb up along the right edge of a platform if he's underneath it. I don't quite know why I have trouble doing that, but that was a consistent quirk of his movement, was sometimes I just couldn't convince him to do it. Grant never really stops being useful, in my opinion. There's a couple levels where he'll be pretty quiet. I think level 8 he's not really going to do anything, but for these mid-game levels like 4 and 5 and 6, he's going to be doing some pretty important stuff. 4 more than any of the other ones. Particularly in the context of a no-damage run, because this mid-boss right here is actually pretty hard to consistently no damage, in my opinion, because sometimes he'll just, like, walk forward into you, and then sometimes he won't, and doing that with Grant just sitting on the ceiling and raining axes down on him eliminates that particular question mark. That's another really important skip. There's like a whole other half of the room back there that I completely bypassed by going up underneath that higher platform. And something very similar to that is going to come up earlier too. That also happened earlier in the room before the floating platforms. There's so much of level 4 that Grant skips. It's so good. This room was another one that I lost some attempts to just because these fucking birds have fucked with me since day one. And there's a very specific thing that happens at the bottom of this staircase that also fucked me up. That bird right there, that came down at me, this was a clever idea. That was an idea that I had very, very late in my attempts, was to use a reverse cross to kill that last bird. With that first bird, it's like, you can end up in the situation where when the bird comes down, you want to sub-weapon it, but because you have to hit up and B to sub-weapon, sometimes you can accidentally just, like, walk back up the stairs and then the bird gets another free shot to swoop down at you, so that first bird is very, very frustrating to try to kill, but I did find a consistent way for the second one. I also finally found a consistent way to deal with these mummies here, which took me a while to figure out. These guys were a real headache for me for a long time, but if you just do that, then they stop being a problem. And here you're going to see a more, like, I guess what I would describe as conventional Cyclops fight. Like, this is how I would fight the Cyclops every time in my original footage. It's slow, but it's safe. And my only stipulation for this run is no damage, so I don't mind doing the pacer test here, running back and forth and waiting for the Cyclops to make himself attackable. I mean, I don't like it, but I wouldn't necessarily want to do it any other way. I'm actually taking a few more risks here than I used to in the past. I probably wouldn't have done that ducking whip thing in the old footage, but at this point I'm kind of like conscious of the time. I don't want this video to be like an hour and 5 minutes long. Like, if I'm gonna segment it, then the footage should look pretty cool. That was my thought process. And cool in this context means fast. Level 5. This is a level that I, like... This is the Dracula's Curse Tower level. And it's the first level, in my opinion, that really makes you, even in the context of like a casual playthrough, if you're not going for like no death or no damage, it's the first level that really makes you like think hard about how you're going to approach every single room. Particularly towards the very end, because it's a lot of verticality, and verticality is always the hardest thing to deal with in classic Castlevania. And this is a good example, a good opportunity to talk about like why I love Dracula's Curse so much. And it's a combination of two factors. Number one, the game is really hard. Like, Dracula's Curse is one of the hardest games I've ever played. The only game that I think is harder is, that I've played personally, is X86. Castlevania X86, aka Chronicles Original Mode. But the fact that Dracula's Curse is so hard means that you are forced to really think about the game in a way you don't have to, in my opinion, for a lot of the other ones, unless you do a specific, like, challenge run, like no damage or no death. Like, every room in Dracula's Curse is kind of like a puzzle, because it's so hard, where you have to figure out, like, these specific steps that you have to take in order to clear the room, and a lot of the challenge comes from that planning stage. Not necessarily, the execution, although the execution also has to be correct. Really, most of what the game is testing you on is having the right tools at the right time. And that can mean sub-weapons, of a particular, like, shot, multiplier, and that can also mean companions. And that's why the companions are, like... That's why the game's difficulty is so important, because if it wasn't so hard, then... you wouldn't... The game wouldn't be, like, forcing you to take advantage of the companions in the same way. You would probably be able to comfortably clear the whole thing with Trevor, but by making the game so hard, the game is saying you need to engage with your companions, you need to figure out what their abilities are, and you need to really take advantage of them in order to win, and that's what I love so much about it. Which is that it encourages a lot of very strategic thinking, and then it rewards it. So this is the room that, like... This is the first really big, like, problem room that I encountered in Dracula's Curse, and I'm gonna take it pretty slowly. There's many, many different ways to do this room. One thing that I did in some of my older footage was I think I would spam the stopwatch to get through it. I'm not gonna do that here because I want Grant to have the axe. And I want to get to the level 5 boss with a certain amount of, with like a lot of hearts. And so if I gave Trevor the stopwatch and just stopwatch spam through all this, number one, stopwatch spamming on Trevor instead of Grant is more risky because Trevor's slower, and you probably have to stopwatch more times to get through the level. And number two, it would just take a lot of hearts that I'd rather save for the boss, and you'll see why I want a lot of hearts for the boss in a moment when we get there. And I specifically need Grant to have the axe. I can't give Grant the stopwatch to stopwatch spam through this. That's also really important because of my strat on the boss coming up. Because this was a boss that's like, he's not that hard to kill, but trying to no damage him specifically wasn't something I'd attempted before, so I get into a very specific position here, and then I just start throwing the axes at him. And I do this because when he summons blocks from the ceiling like that, they never come down that far to the right. They just stop short all the time. And he also can't hit me up here with his other attack where he throws the block. So this is like a perfectly safe spot to be in. And that, as you can see, I came in with like 20-something axes, and then I got out with like 4. So that's what I wanted all those hearts for. And that's why the stopwatch really like wasn't an option for 5C. Anyway, now we're getting into level 6, which is very tricky. The ways in which Grant are going to be useful. Let me try that again. Grant is going to become useful in different ways in level 6 and throughout most of the rest of the game. There are a few little Grant like positional tricks here and there, a few little skips, but mostly what's going to be important about Grant at this point in this level is that he basically gives me access to a second sub-weapon slot. So like I said, level 6 is tricky. 6B is the first example of that, where this is the first time the game does one of its favorite things, which is to throw birds flying around and water that pushes you around at you at the same time. Now Sypha can actually freeze this water with ice, but Sypha doesn't have freeze. Well, rather, I don't have Sypha. That was really risky, that little like jump out of the waterfall, but honestly, that's a point of the level where like you can get stuck there forever if you just keep waiting for spawns to show up and the water keeps pushing you back. So at a certain point, you do have to break out of there, and that, I don't know, I don't think that was a terrible spot. I don't think it was a risk, but it wasn't like a completely unreasonable one. Anyway, level 6 doesn't get really tricky until 6C, which is this level here, but it's not this room, it's the room after this. And this is actually an example of when I was very, very grateful to be playing this on normal mode. In a lot of my footage that I collected the first time I played this game, I played on hard mode. And hard mode in Dracula's Curse is really like a completely different game from normal mode, practically. And one of the most significant differences between normal and hard, in my opinion, are in 6C. Because the concept of this room is turrets, plus tricky platforming, plus respawning bats. But on normal mode, the bats stop respawning here. So I can just deal with whatever else is in this room on my own terms without worrying about them. In hard mode, they keep spawning until you leave the room, so the fact that there are not any respawning bats means that I can do something like this without worrying about like bats coming and getting me while I'm trying to throw holy water down on this guy. And this is like a perfect Grant thing right here, because that's not strictly necessary. I could probably like try to jump down and engage the knight more normally, but that's just safer. Like, Grant just gives me access to this perfect, like, advantageous position, and if you're going for a no-damage run, then safe strategies are paramount, because the tiniest little mistake means you're done. Which is why no-damage runs... This was, like, fun to me in the same way that, like, no-death runs were fun to me when I first started doing those, because they really force you to learn the game in a way that you wouldn't otherwise. Anyway, this part is also really tricky, and there was a thing that I could have done here. Like, I went through several different, like, theories and strategies for how to deal with this part coming up, because there's like the bridge is going to collapse, and then there are these birds coming up here, and I just went with like jumping and hoping that I got the whip timing down right. What I had done in the past there, because if you don't kill them like on their first descent, then like they're gonna swoop down and hit you, because you have to keep walking forward to avoid the bridge. Your position is like so limited, like they're gonna hit you, it's gonna happen, so you have a very brief window to kill them. What I could have done there was give the stopwatch to Grant, because Grant is fast enough that you can like stopwatch and then run up to them and stab them with a knife, but I wanted Grant to fight the sea serpent, which means he had to have the axe, specifically so he could do that little jump at the start of the fight, because I thought that was really cool. Even though it's like really risky, the timing is very specific. You have to start running like as soon as you see the serpent spawn. And that's a perfect example of something that I would never do if this wasn't segmented. So, you might, you know, a segmented run is not like the same thing as like a single segment run, obviously in any respect. But the advantage of it is that the footage ends up looking cooler, because I can go for riskier stuff. So, hopefully that mitigates the disappointment you might feel at this being not single segment. Speaking of segments, I think we're coming up on the second break. There it is. And now we're on to level 7. Which is... I don't know, level 7 was like surprising in how much of a problem it turned out to be. In my runs. I was anticipating 9 being a problem. I was definitely anticipating A being a problem, but 7 has a lot of little, like, quirks that can trip you up if you're going for no damage. There's a very specific thing, like you'd think this platforming section you'd want to use Grant to cross all those floating platforms, but actually if Grant takes that jump between the 3rd and 4th floating platform, he'll bonk his head on the floating terrain up there, and then he'll fall in the pit. So that's a lesson that I learned the hard way. So yeah, this part here was the first really challenging part. I had to like learn this really specifically, and I don't know if you can even see it in the footage there, but that second hunchback that I killed with the harpy actually does this thing where like the hunchback will die and then another hunchback immediately appears in its place. So that also complicates things immensely in that particular section, where when you kill that second hunchback, it doesn't actually fucking die, it just gets replaced with another one. But I just had to drill that and learn it specific. This is also pretty cool. Again, if this wasn't segmented, if I wanted to be super safe, I would probably drop axes on that last turret to kill it, but there is a timing on Grant where you can just outrun the fireball and get up the stairs before it starts shooting at you, so I did that instead. This is another part where holy water is really useful. I don't know if I said this, but the reason I picked up holy water in level 6 for Trevor is because I wanted it for pretty much all of level 7. Even though there is a holy water you can get at the start of level 7, I would have had to like spend time getting it up to like a triple shot. I'd rather just come into the level with a triple shot already. So this is my least favorite part of the whole game, the 7B jump. On Grant, it's not so bad, but trying to make that jump on Trevor or Sypha is like really tight and really specific, so I really don't like that. It's probably the one thing about Dracula's Curse that I would say is like bad without any qualification. It's just that jump. This was another part that actually tripped me up a couple times, just because it's very easy to accidentally like walk too far forward and get hit by that whip skeleton. The birds actually are not that bad, because they're mostly obliging enough to walk into your or to fly into your holy water throw arc. This auto-scroller is pretty boring. I guess that's the cool little trick at the end. So I actually, when I was watching this footage in preparation for this commentary, I actually didn't get this far, so I don't know how bad this monster mash is going to be. That's what I call like the multi-boss encounters in Dracula's Curse. I call it the monster mash. Which can take a very long time and be really terrible. Oh, I'm going for a fast kill here. Okay, this is a good idea. I forgot that I did this, but this is really smart, because there's no reason not to. Look at that shit, they're just gone. I'm pretty sure Trevor's going to be killing all 3 of these bosses. Really the wild card in terms of how long it's going to take is the Cyclops, because sometimes he will continue to obligingly walk under the holy waters, sometimes he just won't, and he'll just, like, juke me pretty much, and, like, accidentally, like right there, he'll just, like, walk, like, and again, he'll just, like, turn around before the holy water hits him, which is bad, because there's a certain amount of holy water that I want for the third boss, because the third boss is actually, on paper, is actually the most dangerous one. In this particular Monster Mash, with this, like, terrain, it's very easy to just cheese the bosses with holy water, but this guy's the hardest to do that with. I mean, as you can see, holy water is still going to take off most of his health, but I had to actually, like, kind of fight this guy, which I didn't have to do for the other two. Okay. In the JP version of Dracula's Curse, that guy's way scarier. He, like, jumps faster. If he lives long enough, he'll shoot fireballs, and the JP fireballs are, like, smaller and harder to see. So, that guy's pretty scary on JP. Which is weird, because one of the things that people always say about Dracula's Curse is, like, the bosses are harder. Which is, I guess, true in that the bosses have more health in the US, in, like, Dracula's Curse than they do in Densetsu, but some of the boss behaviors in Densetsu, I think, are scarier. This was something that I thought about doing for a long time when I collected my old footage, but I never did, and there's, like, no reason not to, basically. I know, actually, it's because, excuse me. There are 5 hearts over on the right that I kind of wanted to get, but I always ended up ending level 8 with, like, way more hearts than I needed, so I ultimately decided that it wasn't necessary, and I could just take the shortcut. This is a room that's, like, really, really, like, specific and, like, tough to get through if you don't know the timings. Tough to get through without taking damage. Because at the top of that first staircase, you got, like, 2 spiders and, like, a sword guy coming at you. Fortunately, I knew the timing ahead already because of, the previous runs that I'd done, but that was tricky to learn. And let's see if okay, good. See, this is what I mean when I say Grant never stops being useful. Even though he's not, like, breaking the game in half exactly, it's just, like, a lot of little things that he helps you out with. That's why he's so interesting. I could... Okay, I'm jumping over it. Alright. Why am I swapping to Grant? Oh, I know why. It's because Grant can just run across this last area before the boss faster. Look at him go. Look at him go in this 4:3 aspect ratio. Yeah, this was something I decided to do. I don't know. I became enamored with 4:3 in my, like, going through these older games. Because the NES emulator does not play in 4:3, it plays in, like, 8:7 or something like that. Something closer to a square, but I figured, whatever. I'll stretch it to 4:3 in the post-processing, and it'll take up more of the screen, maybe people will like it more. I'm sorry if it bothers you, but it was just something I wanted to try out. But I didn't collect the footage in 4:3, this was, like, stretched after the fact. What's nice about 4:3 is that it makes... I didn't even talk about the Grim Reaper fight. I mean, I guess there's not much to say. You kind of saw what you have to do there. It's just like a... It's just like Castlevania 1, where you just spam holy water to stunlock him, but the window is smaller and the positioning is more complicated. But at the end of the day, it's the same shit. This is interesting. I guess I should explain what's interesting. There's an axe that you can get on a ledge at the start of this stage. That I got in my old footage because I would use it to farm hearts off of a torch you can get access to at the top of a staircase coming up here. So that way I could stopwatch spam through 9-2. 9-2 is a lot like 5C. It's like a big turret bonanza, and it's like one of the first big... It's like one of the big problem areas of the game, in my opinion. But I think here I just go through it normally. No, I've got a stopwatch, so I must have some plans for it. I think I use the stopwatch for, like, the last part of 9-2, and I go through the first part normally. I think that's what happens. That's like a good compromise. I spent so much time when I first played this game trying to like get the timing to go underneath that spike thing instead of jumping on top of it. That was very foolish of me, and that made this part a lot harder than it needed to be. You're basically supposed to jump on top of it, and Grant makes that a lot easier. So this is kind of like, it's kind of like 5C again, but it's like, okay, now can you do 5C, with gargoyles coming at you at regular intervals? And this is actually a room that I think is way fucking harder on JP hard mode than on US hard mode. US hard mode is like more difficult than JP hard mode in every single way, except for this stage in particular, because on JP hard mode, the gargoyles in this stage are just on fucking crack cocaine, and they just never stop spawning. It's actually insane. It feels like it's bugged or something, but they literally just never stop spawning. It's ridiculous. It's like the game always wants there to be a gargoyle on the screen at all times. In US hard mode, even they mellowed out on that, but okay, I guess I stopwatched this last part. Okay, that's fine, because this part actually is pretty tricky, because like gargoyles can spawn at like weird timings, and like barely clip you at the very edge of the staircase, and you kind of get caught in this position of like, do I stop in the middle of the staircase to whip the fireball, or do I just try to rush to the end? There, I had a stopwatch, I had the hearts, I just made it easier for myself. Because one consistent problem that I did have with my Dracula's Curse runs, my like first batch of them, was that I would frequently end the levels with like a ton of hearts, which, you know, isn't like terrible, but it does mean that like I collected resources that I didn't use, or that like I could have taken more advantage of what was available to me. So I think I was like kind of looking for opportunities to do that here. Another boring auto-scroller. Sometimes doing this auto-scroller super fast on Grant makes like funny things happen. Like sometimes a skeleton drops out of the sky, but I don't think that happens here. Look at that one up. Go me. There's not much to say about this. Most auto-scrollers are really just kind of about, knowing where the enemies are going to spawn in ahead of time, which is kind of annoying, but it's the kind of thing you only have to learn once, and then you just know it, so it doesn't bother me that much. It's when things are random that I get annoyed. If things are like a little like trollsome, but they always work the same, then I don't get that upset about it. It's kind of what like a lot of auto-scroller spawns are like. Guards or skeletons will just like spawn on top of you like out of the darkness, which can feel pretty bad, but again, you just have to know they're going to be here. Okay, this is 9-4. This is where Grant shines the last time that he really makes like a gigantic impact. You can use sub-weapons while you're climbing on the ceiling, by the way. That was a stopwatch usage while I was hanging upside down from the ceiling. So that's pretty cool. You guys didn't see it, but 9-4 is the hardest stage in the entire game. And if Grant did nothing else but skip 9-4, he would still be worth it, and he would still be really good, so... This was weird. I don't think I necessarily knew that that was going to happen, like the fire was going to hit him through the floor. I think I expected him to jump up on the middle platform, but... Instead he didn't, and it worked out anyway. I'll talk about 9-4 in a little bit, but the doppelganger fight is basically like... Especially if you're trying to no-damage it, like, you're not supposed to really fight it, you're just supposed to figure out a cheese. Which here means, holy water spam. So 9-4 is kind of like, 6B, like with the water and the birds, but you have to do it twice, and it's the hardest part of the whole game, and it's really easy for things to go wrong. And in the no-damage run especially, it's like hell, because like fish are constantly spawning, birds are constantly coming at you. You have to like constantly adjust your movement to the water currents. It's the worst, it's the hardest stage in the entire game, period. The only reason this one doesn't beat it out is because there's a secret for this particular auto-scroller, which is you want to stay as close to the top of the screen as possible, because what's happening here is that the Medusa heads, when they're at like the highest point of their little arc movement, are hitting like the edge of the world and they're despawning. So because they spawn like on the same horizontal line that you're at, if you stay towards the top of the screen, they'll spawn at your horizontal, at your like vertical position, and then they'll like swerve up into the darkness and kill themselves. So that's the trick for that level. This was really hard because there's a turret coming up here blocking this door, and what I always did every other time I played this game is I would just take 1 damage here and think of it as like a damage tax pretty much, but obviously this is supposed to be a no damage, I can't do it, so I had to get creative. Another good thing I wanted the stopwatch for. And that random axe drop was actually really nice, because having the axe for this last little combat section is so great, because otherwise you have to do a thing where, like, you walk forward to push that bone thrower back up against a corner while you're trying to deal with the blood skeleton. And then, like, I would have to go up the stairs, stopwatch, and then, like, try to get to the bone thrower before the stopwatch runs out, and there's just a lot more room for error. But if I just come in with the axe, I just jump, throw the axe, and he dies. So the turret gave me a little gift on the way out. So now here is what I've referred to in the past as the A2 bat forming, the bat platforming. Also known, or as I call it, the real final boss, because honestly, Dracula and Dracula's Curse is an interesting boss. It's my favorite kind of boss. In that, when you first get to him, he's like terrifying, and it's like the hardest thing you've ever done. But once you learn Dracula, he's learnable. And that's only true in the US version. In the JP version, he's a lot more unpredictable in Phase 1, and it's only Phases 2 and 3 that are predictable. But in the US version, the whole fight can be done like consistently once you know it. So I'm not really anticipating any failure past this point, although actually I am, because this is like the last little like thing that I'm only gonna do because the video is segmented, which is the Phase 3 of this fight is gonna look very different than it has in my previous footage. But I'm gonna wait to talk about that until you see it, and then talk about it probably while the credits are rolling. For now I want to talk about Phase 1. In my old footage, I somehow figured out a way to always do consistently no damage Phase 1 with just Trevor's whip, but this knowledge has left my brain at some point. So here I use the dagger to like get in a few safe shots, because I want to kill him in 3 phases. I want him to get out of Phase 1 over near the throne here, which means that I have to do a certain amount of damage every time he makes himself vulnerable, and the dagger just helped me always get that damage while also always maintaining a safe distance, because what can happen sometimes in Phase 1 is that he can like corner you if you're too close to him. You'll get stuck between like him and the fire pillars he summons, and you're just like fucked. But using the dagger, using infinite horizontal range means you avoid that problem. Phase 2, pretty simple, just abusing the axe on Grant. This is where Grant's air control, which I haven't even mentioned up until now, is pretty important. And now we get to level 3. Phase 3. He's a big, goofy bird. I fucking love this fight, man. So there are 2 ways to do Phase 3. There's the pussy way, which I've done in the past, and then there's the Chad way, which is what I'm doing now. The bitch-ass way of doing Phase 3 of Dracula is to sit over by the throne. Get him. Get him. Okay. Sit over by the throne, and then jump and spam the axe, and then like shuffle back and forth to bait and dodge the lasers. If you do that, he will literally never hit you. And if you're over near the throne, the sections of the floor that are next to the throne will never like fly up and float around. So you never have to worry about that element of the fight. You can just stand there, spam axes, and dodge. And it's like 100% safe. But this footage is segmented. I wanted to do something a little flashier. I decided to fight Dracula Phase 3 closer to how probably the devs intended you to fight him, which is to jump all around on the platforms and dodge the bait and dodge the lasers. Which Grant is uniquely really good at, because he can jump higher because he has air control because he's faster, so... That was actually pretty fun to learn that phase properly, finally. And that is like the biggest thing that... If this was a single segment run, under no circumstances would I ever do that. I would never risk the run at the very end for like a flashier boss kill, but here, I decided to go for it. I fucking love this game, man. I love Dracula's Curse so much. Just watching this footage and like hearing this music makes me so happy. Really takes the edge off of having coronavirus. So, Dracula's Curse. I can't say enough good things about Dracula's Curse. I can't say enough good things about Grant. Grant is so cool. He's so interesting. He's so rewarding. Grant McNasty, my boy. You know, like I said before, you can take Grant on the Alucard route, but you really shouldn't do it. And it's not because there aren't necessarily interesting applications of Grant in the Alucard route, it's just because so much of the Alucard route is very clearly built around Alucard. And speaking of the Alucard route, that's the video that's going to come up next, because you had to know I was not just going to make one video about Dracula's Curse. I could never do that. I love this game too much. So, keep your eyes peeled for that. That should be coming out pretty soon. And in the meantime, keep on Earth rocking.